When a man says to you, "You're too emotional," what he's really doing is trying to shut down your voice. And this is important because the moment someone uses your emotions as ammunition against you, they're not trying to understand you, they're trying to dismiss you. Think about that. Instead of listening to what you're actually saying, he's using how you're saying it to avoid taking responsibility. It's a deflection tactic, one that turns the spotlight away from his behavior and onto your reaction. Now, let me be really clear. Emotions are not the problem. Emotions are the truth tellers in relationships. They're the signals. When you feel upset, it's because something touched a nerve. Something didn't feel safe, didn't feel right, or didn't feel valued. Emotions are not the issue. Ignoring them is. And when a guy tells you you're too emotional, what he's really doing is saying, I don't want to deal with what you're feeling because it makes me uncomfortable or forces me to look at myself. You're allowed to have emotions. You're human. And the idea that you should have to suppress them to be more palatable to someone else is not only damaging, it's dangerous. It teaches you to question your reality. You start wondering, maybe I am overreacting. Maybe I am the problem. That inner dialogue, that's not self-awareness, that's gaslighting, internalized. Let's say you're hurt because he canceled plans last minute for the third time. You bring it up, not in an aggressive way, but honestly, vulnerably. You say, it makes me feel like I'm not a priority. And his response? Why are you always so emotional? In that moment, your valid hurt is framed as a character flaw. He's not addressing the pattern of broken plans. He's addressing your reaction to them. And that's the point where you have to pause and really look at what's going on. Because here's the truth. Emotionally intelligent men don't shame you for having feelings. They lean in. They want to know what's going on beneath the surface. They want to fix, not deflect. They know that feelings are part of the deal when it comes to love, intimacy, and commitment. Let's flip the script for a second. Imagine if every time he got upset, you said, wow, you're being way too emotional. Imagine how belittling that would feel to him. Imagine how lonely. Yet women are conditioned to take this kind of criticism quietly. They're told to be cool, to not be needy, to play it low mental mo. But at what cost? At the cost of your voice, at the cost of your needs being met, at the cost of the relationship actually growing. This kind of statement, you're too emotional, creates distance. It creates walls. And relationships don't thrive in silence. They thrive in honest communication. When you speak up about something that hurts and someone listens, a bridge is built. But when they minimize or mock your emotions, the bridge collapses. And what's left is a chasm filled with misunderstanding and resentment. Now, here's the kicker. The more often this happens, the more you start censoring yourself. You stop bringing things up. You start walking on eggshells. You tell yourself, it's not worth the argument. But the problem doesn't go away. It just gets buried. And buried emotions don't die, they rot. They show up later in the form of passive-aggressive comments, sudden outbursts, or numbness. And that's how relationships quietly fall apart. You deserve someone who makes space for your feelings. Someone who says, help me understand why you're feeling this way, instead of, you're being too emotional. That one sentence alone changes everything because it shows a willingness to connect, to repair, and to respect. That's the foundation of intimacy, not just physical, but emotional intimacy. And without emotional intimacy, you're just two people performing for each other, not truly being seen. If he makes you feel like your emotions are a burden, that's not love. That's not safety. That's not someone who's equipped to hold space for a real grown-up relationship. And you don't need to waste your time trying to convince him of your worth. You don't need to prove that your feelings are valid. They are valid. You're allowed to feel deeply, you're allowed to care, and you're allowed to want someone who values that. Now, this doesn't mean that we don't take responsibility for how we express ourselves. Of course we do. It's one thing to feel something, it's another to communicate it in a way that's productive and kind. But here's the thing, when you're in a safe relationship, you're able to express your emotions without fear of being shamed. You can say, "That really hurt me," and the other person leans in instead of pulling away. That's what safety looks like. That's what love sounds like. And if that's not what you're getting, if instead you're constantly being told that you're the problem because you feel too much, then maybe it's time to stop trying to explain your worth and start walking towards someone who already sees it. Because the moment a man uses your emotions to silence you instead of hear you is the moment you need to start listening to yourself. If you really loved me, you would. It's one of those phrases that sounds innocent enough at first, like it's just someone expressing a need, asking for reassurance. But when you stop and really listen to what's being said, it's so much more than that. It's not a request, it's pressure. It's an emotional trap. And when someone uses it, what they're doing, whether they realize it or not, is testing your love through manipulation, not through connection. Love, real love, isn't about passing tests. It's not something that should constantly have to prove itself just to be valid. When a man says, "If you really loved me, you would," what he's often doing is shifting the dynamic of the relationship. Suddenly it's not about mutual respect or understanding anymore. It becomes a negotiation where your love is the bargaining chip. And once that happens, the relationship stops being safe. It becomes conditional. Think about it. When someone says that to you, they're not taking responsibility for how they feel or what they want. Instead, they're turning it around and placing the burden on you. It's no longer, "I would really love if we could do this," or "I need more of this from you." It's, "Prove to me that you love me by doing what I want." That's not vulnerability. That's control. And what's really dangerous is how subtle it can be. It doesn't always come in the form of demands. Sometimes it's framed in sadness, disappointment, or withdrawal. "If you really cared about me, you wouldn't go out with your friends tonight. If you really loved me, you'd tell your family about us. If you really loved me, you'd move in." See what's happening there? The moment you push back or even pause to think, you're met with guilt. It makes you question yourself. You start wondering, wait, am I being selfish? Am I not showing enough love? And before you know it, you're changing your behavior, not because you truly believe in the decision, but because you're afraid of losing the relationship. And here's the tricky part. Most people don't realize they're even being manipulated. They think they're compromising, being generous, making a sacrifice for someone they care about. And compromise is part of any healthy relationship, yes. But there's a huge difference between a healthy compromise and emotional blackmail. In a healthy relationship, both people come to the table with their wants and needs. And they talk. They try to understand each other, meet in the middle, and make choices that reflect mutual care. But when someone uses love as a measuring stick, "If you really loved me," they're not meeting you halfway. They're asking you to abandon yourself to prove your loyalty to them. And here's the truth that's often hard to admit. If someone is constantly asking you to prove your love in this way, it's probably because deep down, they don't feel secure. But instead of working on that insecurity, instead of being open about it, they try to control the environment. They try to control you. And that's not fair. That's not love. That's fear disguised as romance. The problem is, this kind of manipulation erodes your sense of self over time. It chips away at your boundaries. At first, it's just one thing. You give in, you say, "Okay, maybe I am being difficult." But then it happens again and again. And suddenly, you're not recognizing yourself anymore. You've built a relationship around keeping someone else happy, walking on eggshells, avoiding conflict, just to maintain a peace that only exists when you're doing what they want. And it's not just about the specific ask, it's the pattern. Once someone knows they can get what they want by questioning your love, they'll keep doing it. It becomes a cycle. They demand, you comply. They feel reassured for a moment. But then the insecurity creeps back in and the cycle starts all over again, because no amount of compliance ever fills the void of someone who doesn't feel lovable to begin with. Here's what real love sounds like. I feel anxious when we don't talk before bed. Could we try checking in more often? Or it makes me feel disconnected when you're out all the time and I don't know when I'll see you next. That's someone being vulnerable. That's someone showing you their heart. There's no guilt, no manipulation, just honesty, just a desire to work together to create something strong. So if a man is constantly making you prove your love, if you're finding yourself having to choose between your peace and his approval, that's not love worth keeping. That's not the foundation of a relationship that's going to grow. That's a power imbalance, and you deserve better. You deserve someone who doesn't need to be convinced that you care. You deserve someone who meets you in the middle, who talks to you with respect, who values your autonomy and honors your boundaries. You deserve a partner who says, let's figure this out, not, if you loved me, you'd already know what to do. Because here's the thing, love isn't a test. And if someone keeps trying to make it one, walk away. When a man says, all my exes were crazy, you need to pay attention, not because it's juicy gossip or some wild backstory, but because of what it reveals about him and how he views relationship. It might sound like a throwaway comment or something even slightly humorous, but buried in that sentence is a dangerous pattern. What he's really telling you is that he doesn't take ownership. If every single woman he's been with was crazy, you have to ask, what's the common denominator in all of those relationships? It's him. And if he hasn't paused to reflect on his part in any of those connections falling apart, then he hasn't grown. He's just pointing fingers, rewriting history to make himself the victim and painting the people he once claimed to care about in a negative light. Now let's be clear. Sometimes people genuinely go through tough relationships with partners who were toxic, manipulative, or emotionally unstable. That does happen. But someone with emotional maturity doesn't weaponize that story. They don't use it as a way to dismiss or devalue their past partner. They speak with compassion, even if the relationship didn't end well. They take accountability. They say things like, we just weren't right for each other. Or, there were issues on both sides and I've learned from that. Those are signs of someone who's grown, someone who's safe. But when someone throws the term crazy around lightly, especially when talking about every ex, that's a red flag. Not about the people he dated, but about him. It's lazy, it's judgmental, and most importantly, it's revealing. What he's showing you is that he lacks emotional depth and self-awareness. He likely sees women as the problem rather than seeing the dynamics of a relationship as something two people create together. Even worse, when a man calls his exes crazy, what he's often doing, consciously or not, is priming you. He's planting a seed. If you start to show emotion, if you push back, if you challenge me, you'll just become another crazy one. That's manipulation in a subtle, dressed-up form. It makes you second-guess yourself. It puts you in a box before you've even had a chance to speak up. That way, when conflict inevitably arises, he already has a narrative ready. See, you're just like the rest of them. Think about how that feels in a relationship. You're not just fighting to be heard, you're fighting against a label that he's already decided for you. That's not love, that's control. It creates a power dynamic where he holds the moral high ground and you're always on the defensive, trying to prove that you're different. That's not intimacy, that's walking on eggshells. And let's not ignore the bigger issue here. If he can talk disrespectfully about someone he once loved, or at least once claimed to, you have to wonder how he'll speak about you if things end. That's someone who lacks respect. Because no matter how bad a relationship ended, someone with real emotional integrity will never try to tear another person down just to lift themselves up. especially not in front of someone new. Now, here's where it gets even more dangerous. If you're an empathetic person, and so many women are, you might feel sorry for him when he says these things. You might think, wow, he's been hurt a lot. Maybe he just needs someone to show him what real love feels like. But that's a trap, because if his history with women is full of chaos and drama, and he's made no effort to examine that, he's not looking for healing. He's looking for someone to tolerate his behavior without question. And that's a heavy burden to carry. You are not a rehabilitation center for someone's broken past. You are not the one who has to fix years of emotional immaturity, especially when the other person isn't willing to do the work. You deserve someone who arrives ready, not perfect, but accountable. Someone who's learned from their mistakes, who speaks with kindness about their past, even when it's painful. When a man dismisses all his exes as crazy, what he's really doing is distancing himself from vulnerability. He's creating a wall between himself and the lessons those relationships could have taught him. And if he's not willing to learn from the past, how can he possibly build something healthy in the future? You don't want to be the next crazy ex in someone's story. You don't want to be the next chapter in a cycle of blame and deflection. That's why it's so important to listen closely, not just to what he says about you, but what he says about them. It tells you who he is when the spotlight isn't on him. And more often than not, that's when the truth slips out. The man who constantly labels others as the problem rarely realizes that he might be the one repeating it. And if you ignore that early on, you could find yourself in a relationship where you're constantly having to prove that you're not like the rest. A battle no one should have to fight in a relationship built on love and mutual respect. So when a man says this, when he talks down on every woman he's dated, when he shrugs off his past as if he had nothing to do with it, when he uses the word crazy like it's a punchline, walk away. Because it's not just about what he thinks of them, it's about what he'll eventually think of you. And you don't need to stick around to find out. You know, one of the biggest traps people fall into, especially when they really like someone, is accepting vague language as enough. And one of the classic examples of this is when a guy says, I don't believe in labels. Now, I know how tempting it is to give that a pass, especially when the chemistry is strong. The late night conversations feel deep and you're thinking, maybe we don't need to define this right now. Maybe he's just different. Maybe he's been hurt before. Maybe he's just taking things slow. But let's really break this down. When someone tells you, I don't believe in labels, they're not making some profound philosophical statement about human connection. What they're doing, intentionally or not, is giving themselves an out. It's a way of getting close to you, enjoying the emotional and physical benefits of a relationship without having to offer you the clarity, commitment, and security that you need to feel safe and respected. And you might think, well, maybe he just wants to take things slow, and that's fair. But let me tell you the difference. Someone who truly wants to build something real with you, even if it's at a steady pace, will communicate that clearly. They'll say, I really like you. I'm serious about where this could go, and I want to build it the right way. That's very different from someone saying, let's not label this, whilst still expecting you to act like you're in a relationship, without ever giving you the respect of calling it one. Because here's what usually happens in these situations. You start investing more and more, thinking that eventually things will just naturally evolve. You stay quiet about what you really want because you're scared to scare him off. You give and give and give, hoping he'll see your value and finally choose you. But you can't inspire commitment from someone by giving more of yourself. Commitment doesn't come from how much you prove your worth. It comes from how ready they are and how seriously they're willing to show up. Let me say something really clearly. Ambiguity is not romantic. It's not mysterious. It's not just how guys are. Ambiguity is avoidance. It keeps you stuck in a dynamic where you're the one making all the emotion investments and he's the one holding all the power. Now, I get it. walking away from someone you have a connection with, someone you want to be with, is incredibly hard, especially when they're not outright treating you badly. Maybe he's kind, charming, even thoughtful at times. And that's what makes it confusing, because you think if he's doing all these good things, maybe I just need to wait a little longer. Maybe I'm being too demanding. You're not. Wanting clarity is not demanding. Wanting to know if someone sees a future with you is not pressure. It's emotional maturity. And you have every right to ask for it. But here's where it gets dangerous. When someone consistently says they don't believe in labels, it creates a situation where you start lowering your standards to match their limitations. You start telling yourself, well, maybe I don't need a label either. Maybe what we have is enough. And now you're editing your needs just to keep someone who isn't even trying to meet them. You deserve someone who's proud to call you theirs, who doesn't hesitate to define what you are because they're sure about what they feel. You don't need to chase a man into calling you his partner. You don't need to beg for clarity. The moment someone says they don't believe in labels, ask yourself, what am I really looking for? Because if you're looking for love, commitment, a shared vision of a future, you do believe in labels. You believe in the kind of love that's not just felt, but owned. There's not just experienced in fleeting moments, but built with intention. And if someone can't meet you there, not because they're a bad person, but because they're not ready or willing, then it's not your job to wait around hoping they'll change. You can respect someone's journey and still decide it's not aligned with yours. Don't let someone's indecision keep you from the relationship you truly want, because someone out there is looking for exactly what you have to offer, and they'll be sure when they find it. So if a man says he doesn't believe in labels, you don't need to get angry. You don't need to prove him wrong, and you definitely don't need to try to win him over. You just need to walk away. If a man ever says to you, "You're lucky to have me," I want you to stop. I want you to really hear those words, not as flattery, not as confidence, but as a signal, because what that sentence really reveals isn't love or appreciation or even self-assuredness. It reveals ego. It reveals someone who has forgotten the fundamental truth of any healthy relationship, mutual value. See, when someone says, "You're lucky to have them," they're placing themselves on a pedestal above you. They're telling you, whether they mean to or not, that you should feel grateful to be with them, that they are some kind of prize you were lucky enough to win. And I get it. We all want to feel chosen. We all want to feel special in someone's eyes. But there's a huge difference between someone choosing you and someone elevating themselves over you. And here's the thing. Relationships are partnerships, not hierarchies. The moment someone starts acting like you're beneath them, they stop treating you with respect. They stop listening the same way. They stop being curious about your needs, your feelings, your dreams. Instead, everything starts to revolve around them. Their time becomes more important. Their needs take center stage. Your concerns, they get brushed aside, minimized, or dismissed entirely. Because, after all, you're lucky just to be with them, right? That kind of dynamic is toxic. It slowly erodes your sense of self. You begin to second guess your own worth. You start thinking, maybe you are lucky. Maybe you should tolerate that disrespect, that inconsistency, that absence of effort. Because, hey, look who you've got. But that's the trick. That's the illusion. You're not lucky to be with someone who makes you feel less than. That's not luck, that's settling. Real luck in love is meeting someone who sees you as their equal. Someone who says, "I can't believe I get to be with you." Not in a way that makes you feel like you're on a pedestal either, but in a way that reflects mutual awe, mutual respect, mutual investment. A relationship should feel like two people who admire each other, support each other, challenge each other, not one person constantly validating the other while getting crumbs in return. And let's not kid ourselves. Sometimes this "you're lucky to have me" line doesn't even come out directly. Sometimes it's more subtle. It's in the way he talks about his job, his looks, his options. It's the way he drops hints that other women want him, or how he could have anyone, or how you wouldn't find someone better. Those comments, even when said jokingly, are meant to chip away at your confidence and keep you in a place where you feel like he's doing you a favor by staying with you. But let me ask you this. Why would you want to be with someone who wants you to feel small just so they can feel big? That's not love. That's insecurity wrapped in arrogance. That's someone who needs to put you down in order to lift themselves up. And if a man needs to do that, then he's not strong. He's fragile. Because strong men don't need to belittle others to feel powerful. Strong men uplift their partners. They create space for them to shine, to grow, to be celebrated. They want their partner to feel confident because they're not threatened by your light. They're inspired by it. So if someone ever says, "You're lucky to have me," I want you to turn that question around. Ask yourself, am I lucky to have him? Really? Take away the attraction, take away the chemistry, the charm, the big promises. What are you left with? Does this person show up for you? Are they consistent? Do they communicate with respect? Do they make you feel safe, seen, and supported? Do they encourage you to be your best self, or do they subtly undermine your growth? Because if you're not feeling valued, if you're constantly being reminded how lucky you are without ever feeling like that luck flows both ways, then you already have your answer. You don't need to wait for a blow up, a betrayal, or a dramatic exit. That one sentence alone, "You're lucky to have me," can be enough. It's a window into a deeper belief system, one that, if left unchecked, will continue to cost you your joy, your self-esteem, and your peace. The right relationship will never make you feel like you need to prove your worth. The right person won't use their presence in your life as leverage. They'll see it as an opportunity to love deeply, to grow together, to build something with you. And they'll be grateful too, not in a desperate way, not in a way that seeks validation, but in a way that recognizes what a gift it is to walk through life with someone who chooses them back. So if a man says, "You're lucky to have me," don't argue, don't explain, don't beg him to see your value. Just smile, stand up, and walk away, because he's the one who just lost something special. Here's the truth that most people miss when it comes to relationships. What someone says can feel incredibly powerful. The right words, said at the right moment, can stir your heart, lower your guard, and make you believe in something that's not even real. But there's something far more powerful than words: consistency. And if a man's words don't match his actions, I don't care how charming, persuasive, or even vulnerable he sounds, that's your clarity. See, the most dangerous guy is not the one who's outright cruel or cold. He's not the one who's clearly uninterested or emotionally unavailable from the start. The guy who really throws you off balance is the one who says all the right things. He tells you how special you are. He says he's never met anyone like you. He talks about the future. He paints this incredible picture of what the two of you could be. But when you look at how he shows up, when you actually observe the day-to-day reality, he's nowhere to be found. He cancels plans last minute. He's hot and cold. He disappears when things get emotionally deep. He tells you he misses you, but makes no effort to see you. He says you're important to him, but your needs are constantly an afterthought. That mismatch between words and behavior is the red flag you need to trust, because what you need to understand is this: someone's actions are the real version of their feelings. That's the truth of it. People can say they care, people can say they love you, but love is a verb. If they're not showing up with effort, presence, reliability, and care, you're not in a relationship, you're in a fantasy. And I know that can be hard to accept, especially if you're someone who sees the best in people. You think, but he said he wants to try, or he told me he's just scared, he's been hurt before. And I get it. That taps into your empathy, your compassion. You want to be the person who's different, the one who helps him open up. But you have to ask yourself, how many times has he said something beautiful to you only to go back to acting the same way? How many times has he promised change only for things to stay exactly as they were? If the pattern is this, he messes up, he disappears, he makes you feel confused or neglected, then comes back with a grand gesture or a heartfelt message, and then nothing changes. You're in a cycle. That's not growth. That's emotional bait. And you have to be strong enough to see it for what it is. Because here's what's really happening. He's using words as a temporary fix, a shortcut, a reset button, instead of doing the real work of being present, being accountable, and being emotionally available. He's giving you just enough to stay without ever actually showing up in a meaningful way. And here's why that's so dangerous. When someone is inconsistent, they train you to live off emotional breadcrumbs. They condition you to feel like a little bit of affection, a few nice words, or a spontaneous "I miss you at midnight" is some grand romantic gesture, but it's not. That's not what you deserve. You deserve someone whose words and actions line up. Someone who doesn't just tell you how much they care, but proves it in how they treat you every single day. A guy who means it won't have you guessing. He won't leave you waiting by the phone. He won't go days without speaking to you and then swoop in with a sweet text to reset your heart. No. A guy who's serious about you doesn't want you to wonder where you stand. He wants to show you. He wants to make you feel safe, seen, and prioritized. Not just when it's convenient for him, but especially when it isn't. You have to pay attention to the small moments, not the big speeches, not the romantic declarations after a fight, not the apologies that sound like poetry. Look at the behavior. When you were sick, was he there? When you needed support, did he show up? Does he remember the things that matter to you? Not because you remind him, but because he listens. When he makes a promise, does he keep it? When he says he'll call, does he follow through? These little things, they aren't little, they're everything. Because anyone can play the role for a day, anyone can deliver the right lines when they feel you slipping away, but true intimacy is built in the consistency, in the reliability, in the showing up again and again, not because they have to, but because they want to. And if that's missing, if he says he wants a relationship but acts single, if he says he respects you but crosses boundaries, if he says you matter but treats you like an option, it doesn't matter what he says. It just doesn't. His words may be poetic, but his actions are the truth. And I know it hurts. I know the hardest thing in the world is walking away from someone you have feelings for, especially when they say all the things you've been waiting to hear. But those words aren't love. They're just noise when they're not backed by action. And you owe it to yourself to stop clinging to potential and start choosing consistency. You are not asking for too much by expecting someone to follow through. You are not high management for wanting to feel secure in a relationship. You are not too sensitive for noticing when someone's behavior doesn't match their words. That's your intuition speaking. That's your self-respect whispering, this isn't enough. So if you find yourself constantly justifying his behavior, if you're replaying his sweet words in your head just to cover the pain of how he's actually treating you, that's the sign. Not to try harder, not to prove your worth, not to give him one more chance. That's the moment you remind yourself you're not here for empty promises. You're not here for someone's potential. You're here for someone who shows up and keeps showing up because they value you, not just when it's easy, but when it matters most. Walk away from the words that don't lead to action. Walk away from the confusion. Walk away from the inconsistency. Because love isn't found in what someone says, it's found in what they do. Every day, over time, without needing to be asked.